Welcome, viewers. This took a while, and I could go through the whole process, but it basically boils down to that I got a lot busier, and I had to reinstall the game at some point and redo all the footage, and you know what, I eventually got done with it, so it's all good. I'd only played the second game in the Rise of the Witch King expansion, so I was excited to play this one, and I'll be explaining the differences for all those people like me who hadn't seen it, or people who have played neither game but have maybe seen my earlier 3 videos, which I would recommend seeing. Anyhow, the rules for this challenge are that rule number 1, I have to recruit all allies on the map. Some of these missions will have neutral units that I have to bring to my side at some point, and I have to protect them from the enemies as well as the troops that I control from the beginning. Rule number 2 is pretty self-explanatory, that I have to keep all of my units alive, hence the deathless challenge. But rule number 3 has a slight caveat for this, and that units are bought and controlled through battalions, unless they're like heroes. And since they can be revived individually through the banner carrier mechanic, I decided that it would still be considered deathless as long as one member of the battalion is still alive, because technically they could be revived completely just with that one remaining member. And rule number 4 is that buildings are fair game and can be destroyed at any time, because it's not that challenge, so I just have to focus on protecting my units, and it doesn't matter how many buildings go down in the process. So the first difference is that I'm on the world map, kind of like the War of the Ring in the second game if you played that, and we cross starting from Moria all the way to the Black Gate. Now, from here, I could already tell that this would probably be more than 8 missions, like it was in the second game, and it turns out that there were 20 missions in all. So I'm probably not going to spend as much time with each mission, but I will still highlight what I think is interesting, and what I think y'all should know, you know, whatever. So what's cool about some of these missions is that they're what I call hero missions, where they're basically dungeon crawlers or adventure games with RTS mechanics, because you don't really build troops and bases like you normally would. You control heroes to complete your objective. And I mean, that makes sense for the Mines of Moria, because it wouldn't make any sense for anyone else to be there. And right off the bat, the powers are pretty similar to what some of the good guy powers that I saw in the first game, and unfortunately it still holds true that most of the good powers are for summoning. So like the eagles, the ents, the men of the dead, all of these are on a timer, and so I can't use any of them in a mission unless they're guaranteed to win the battle for me in the allotted time. And it doesn't even give me any bombardment or the water cavalry of the elves. And so it is a little bit disappointing power-wise, but I do get a couple passive buffs for my heroes specifically, and that'll make Aragorn and Gandalf pretty useful later on. The only enemies that I face are some goblins, which are just easily destroyed by any of my heroes, including my Hobbit heroes, until I do start eventually facing some cave trolls. The level continues being like an adventure game, because there are even bonus items that instantly level up my heroes that I can get as treasures in this level, and it just gives it kind of a fun aesthetic, even though it's not really challenging, which I wouldn't expect a first mission to be anyway. I do notice the powers, because I get the healing power once I have enough points for it, require me to right click after, so I left click to select it, and then I right click to activate it, which in the second game it's just 2 left clicks. And this wouldn't seem like a problem, but when you have a specific type of muscle memory, it can lead to some problems, including Gandalf dying to the Balrog. Which is kind of funny that I lost the first mission, which, I mean, you know, it happens, especially if it's a game I've never played before. And I was kind of hoping that it would let me kind of continue on the mission. I mean, I would have to restart the mission because Gandalf's death would count as a death, but I was kind of hoping that the game itself would let me pass on. But no, I win as Gandalf, and I was expecting it to be one of those unwinnable cutscenes type things, but no, according to this game, Gandalf just wins and just immediately beats the Balrog and continues with the Fellowship. So it's interesting. It's like a slightly alternate history. And like I said, just with that one hiccup, it ended up being 2 attempts to beat the first mission. So for mission 2, I actually started as Rohan under Amer, and I could choose where I would go, so obviously I chose to go to the Westfold, because I personally would never let the Westfold fall. Here we get a first look at the base building mechanics. There are several different outposts that have limited number of building slots, so there are no builders other than specific units that can repair buildings. And instead, buildings are built on these slots, so that means that enemies have to destroy all of the buildings and the central outpost, and then capture the command point in order to convert it. So then in the later missions and in skirmishing, the map just becomes this back and forth checkerboard game where the enemy will try to take your old outposts while you can't leave troops behind, and then you have to go forward before the enemies can go. And yeah, it didn't really get annoying until the really late missions, and I'll get there when I get there, but for now I have the Rohirrim, and they are pretty overpowered for this mission. I did notice that the Rohirrim took damage when they trampled sword-wielding infantry. In the second game, you only take damage from spear-wielding and pike-wielding infantry, so that's a little bit annoying, and I'll have to be careful when using a lot of Rohirrim to make sure that a battalion doesn't die in the midst of it. Using my superior movement and units, I scouted the map and found the Isengard encampments, and then destroyed them, winning me the mission. It was at this point that I noticed that my troops would also stay from mission to mission, and I could also name them, which is really cool. So I made little themes depending on the type of unit. So since I had all Rohirrim, say hello to John Squad, Joel Squad, Job Squad, Josh Squad, Johnny Squad, and Johan Squad. For the next mission, we join the Fellowship again as they journey to Lothlorien, and this time Gandalf gets to join them, which is cool. It's a very short path, killing some goblins, until we get to the main part of Lorien, where we then have to defend it across multiple bridges. At first, I thought that the enemy would attack at multiple points at once, so I was spreading apart the army, but the game literally tells you which side that they'll go, and they only go through one bridge at a time, so I didn't have to worry about that. I was a little bit worried about the normal units, so even though I could build elven archers, and I had them in the back to support my heroes just in case, but I mostly sent my heroes ahead. Unfortunately, the enemy sends cave trolls that can one-shot all of my hobbits, and even when I sent them in the back, being smart and having them equipped with rocks, the trolls would sometimes just completely bypass my front line like Boromir and Aragorn and just go straight for Sam. Overall, it was a pretty uncomplicated level, but it did take me 11 attempts. Mission 4, I went to Rohan, and it was just another skirmish map that I beat in 1 attempt. So the Fellowship moved on to Amon Hen in Mission 5. This is where Boromir died in the books, but obviously for this challenge, I'm required to save him, and I probably would have done so anyway, which let me bring Boromir for the rest of the campaign. It was pretty fun having to collect the members of the Fellowship, but other than that, it was a very straightforward level that I beat in 1 attempt. So now Aomer's host went to West Emnet for Mission 6, but this time we got some Rohirrim archers. The level gave me a little bit more difficulty, having to split my army up into 2 to make sure that the Rohirrim archers weren't going onto the front lines, but I beat the level in 4 attempts. And welcome to the squad, Bob Squad, Bobby Squad, Bastion Squad, Beatrice Squad, and Beauregard Squad. For Mission 7 in East Rohan, we have the first alteration to the Rohirrim formula. Isengard has captured 4 different groups of peasants across the map, and I have to capture them without getting my base destroyed or any of my units killed before they're taken out of the map. I didn't notice exactly how much time had to pass before the peasants were killed, but when I took too much time at one point and just built up my base, I noticed that they were gone. Having to be more aggressive caused my troops to die a lot, especially Aomer. Sidebar, I didn't look at any actual statistics and try to calculate anything, but I just got this feeling that in the first game, heroes died easier than they do in the second game. But like I said, this is completely unsubstantiated. So I saved all of the peasants and defeated the Isengard bases and won in 10 attempts. Unfortunately, a mechanic that I've enjoyed so far, where I retain continuity of my troops, kind of bites me in the butt this time, because I now have 4 groups of peasants that I'm required to keep with my Rohirrim, because I can't let any of my troops die, and they do take up command points every time. But despite that, I welcome Clan O'Brien, Clan O'Malley, Clan O'Donovan, and Clan O'McAvoy to my group. For Mission 8 in the Eves of Fangorn, I have to rescue Merry and Pippin from an orc encampment. I still have Rohirrim troops, but I just start with a couple of battalions without access to armor. The cool part about this level is that each time I destroy an enemy lumber camp, I get an int under my control. They are extremely slow, but nearly unkillable as long as the enemy doesn't shoot them with fire arrows, and they do have orc archers with fire arrows that you have to be careful with. As the mission went on, I kept on getting more ints, and they became a little bit hard to keep track of, and then backtracking from the ints to my Rohirrim sometimes caused the Rohirrim to get killed. But eventually, I start building up bigger contingents of ints that can start progressing into the map, and as far as I could tell, the orcs will never kill Merry and Pippin. I wasn't sure if that was a way to lose the level. But after a certain amount of time passes, I can click on a banner in the upper left corner, which lets me now get my main force led by armor, and with the help of the ints, I drive Isengard out and let Merry and Pippin escape. I figured that I wouldn't be able to add the ints to my army, even though I was hoping that I was, but also all of the Rohirrim that I bought over the course of the mission didn't get added to the host, so I didn't get to nickname anyone new this time. This mission also took 10 attempts. For Mission 9, Aemir and his group have arrived into Fangorn proper, so naturally there are more ints, but not as many as the last level. So I have to search around in order to find them, while naturally fighting off Isengard's troops. The level is more basic than the last one, but there are more enemies and it's in a slightly more cramped area. After one attempt where I sent out my whole army without protecting my clansmen that I'd left back at my base, allowing Clan O'McAvoy to die, I was able to beat the level on attempt 2 just by sending my army around, while sending the ints that I've gathered to defend the clans, while I send the rest of the Rohirrim to take down the main enemy base. Since I already saved the West Fold at the beginning, I now head to the East Fold to defend it. The Rohirrim host is joined by Gandalf on Shadowfax, and this level mixes up a little bit from the formula, where it gives us 9 minutes to prepare for an Isengard assault, so I go across the whole map and build up mini bases wherever I can, so that when they attack with a force, I send my troops back to my main fort, which has walls and arrow towers, so that I can send out my troops little bits at a time. And once I've beaten their first main force, I then send my army out, led by Gandalf, and wipe out the enemies that are there. While I have enjoyed this first game, the missions have definitely been quantity over quality compared to the second game, but now we've hit a huge story point in Helm's Deep, and I wasn't disappointed. At the beginning of the level, I only had King Theoden, Éowyn, Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, Boromir, the Fortress of Helm's Deep, and 10 minutes to prepare. So naturally, after building up my resources, I started building as many archers as I could. Since I don't know right off the bat how much enemies would be sent in the waves, I decided that the best way to protect my troops would be to have no hand-to-hand combat going on outside of the gates. This unfortunately made most of my heroes useless. Legolas is obviously the most useful hero, but Boromir and Aragorn also help, because they have access to leadership abilities that can cause our archers to gain experience faster and have an increase to damage. I also get some elven troops to help us, and I just place them among the archers. If you've ever played any other Lord of the Rings games, or seen the movies or read the books, you'd probably expect there to be siege ladders, and I was expecting them too. So I split my archers into two sides, and then left my melee heroes on the outsides of them, in case any ladders were placed outside of their reach. The siege starts with a 15-minute timer before I get access to my Rohirrim led by Gandalf and Éomer, and the enemy sends out a huge amount of troops that actually looks like it might be 10,000. The battle then becomes an ADHD nightmare. The enemies approach from multiple sides, and then I have to continually assess the field to see what enemies I have to prioritize. Obviously, if any ladders make it to the walls, then the melee units can start attacking me in bulk, which is more dangerous than the crossbowmen on the ground, but then I also have to make sure that the crossbowmen on the ground don't rack up too much damage. However, the crossbowmen aren't as dangerous as the ballista to my troops from the ground, but the ballista aren't as dangerous as the bombs that can sneak inside the enemy troops, and if they get too close, obviously they're going to blow the wall to bits, taking a bunch of my troops with them. So after going through attempt after attempt where I trained myself where the enemies will generally be and when I need to target them, I finally get access to my Rohirrim and I can start a charge. It doesn't end there, however, because the enemies can still target my units on the walls, and the Rohirrim obviously aren't invincible. But eventually I was able to rout out the enemy bases, defend Helm's Deep without losing a single archer, hero, or refugee. Helm's Deep took 23 attempts to beat and added a bunch new troops to our ongoing army. Clan O'Sullivan joined from the refugees, Jehoshaphat's squad was our newest Rohirrim to join, and our new archer squads are the oaks, the roses, the chrysanthemums, the daisies, the lilies, the pansies, the hibiscuses, the tulips, and the orchids. In terms of pure fun, Mission 12 was my favorite by far. In Isengard, I have Merry Pippin and an army of ants that are boosted to have the speed of horses. This level strikes the perfect balance between puzzle and power fantasy because the ants can just tear through enemy armies, but the Isengard units also have access to fire arrows that can kill the ants, and Saruman with his fireball that can kill the hobbits and the ants in one hit. After doing some stealthy bits and utilizing my hobbits, I was able to isolate and kill Saruman. After that, I finally got to my final charge, thinking that I'd accounted for all of the fire arrow crossbowmen, but unfortunately one of my ents did catch fire. However, instead of giving up, I sent everyone to attack the dam at once, and they were able to destroy it and win the level before that ent died, letting me beat Mission 12 in 5 attempts. We now join back with Frodo and Sam in Athelion, where they meet up with Faramir and his rangers. So now I have a chance to live through a cool part in the movie, but it's a lot more intimidating in this level since I have to protect my units from enemy Mumakil and their much greater numbers. The enemy has multiple small camps throughout the map, with the easier ones being in the north, the main camp being in the southwest, and then 2 command points that I can destroy and take over. But when I take these over, it starts a 5-minute countdown for a large convoy. And since I don't want to deal with this convoy, I use guerrilla tactics to hammer down on the main enemy fort before taking out the bases surrounding the command points, which lets me clutch the victory on the 3rd attempt. The rangers I made during this mission stay with Faramir, and so I named and added the Red Feather, Blue Feather, Yellow Feather, and New Feather battalions. For Mission 14, I was given a slew of choices, where I could either send the Rohan host or Faramir's host to multiple different levels, and so I decided to send the Rohan host to Caer Andros. I'm started with my Rohirrim, as you'd expect, and a large fortress, and so I decided to try to hole up there and defend it. But unfortunately, Rohan does not have very good defensive structures, and even though I built in a postern gate to send my troops out against the enemy hosts were too large and approached too rapidly for me to get my troops out in time, and also they sent catapults to start destroying my gate, so I decided to switch over to Faramir's host. I eventually started utilizing towers on the path and sending some of my rangers there to defend without risk of getting damage until the tower started to fall, so I had to keep an eye on that health, while I used my enclosed fort to start building up resources so that I could get more rangers as well as tower guards, which are the strongest hand-to-hand unit, and I could actually create a new battalion by joining my troop of rangers with the troop of tower guard to become one single unit, which is really cool and helps me with this challenge. Eventually, I was able to advance with my forces once I'd built them up inside of the walls, and after 13 attempts, I was finally able to beat the level. I made up a new naming scheme for my tower guards, and alternated the names for the combined battalions, which let me add Pink Feather and Stink Feather, as well as the lions, jaguars, lynxes, and pumas. Mission 15 was Dun Harrow, and I beat it in 1 attempt pretty easily, but that one file got corrupted, and I was too lazy to restart the level. So moving on to the much more difficult level, level 16, is Osgiliath. For this level, I'm given a mediocre defending force to hold 3 bridges, and the enemy's superior trolls and forces instantly steamroll my troops. So in order to save them, I have to retreat all of them back to my forces, even though the objective gets mad at me for that. But getting all of my troops together in one location, with walls, towers, and new troops that I build, helps me fend them off. Once I've slowly secured my side of the map, I split up my forces into 3 decent-sized groups that I put at the head of each bridge to defend them and prevent enemies from crossing, and then I start invading the enemy's forces starting with the top. I have some difficulty due to the strength of the enemies, and because they have Nazgul riding fell beasts, and in one attempt the fell beast just went straight over my troops, who weren't able to kill it in time, and it headed straight for a trebuchet and killed it. But later I made sure to target down the fell beasts as well as the catapults to make sure they didn't take too much of my troops out, and I was able to consume and overwhelm the enemy bases, taking them out one by one. This took 10 attempts and added a ton to my Gondor army. So please welcome the tigers, the house cats, bobcats, panthers, servals, black feather, stack feather, brown feather, town feather, green feather, and lean feathers. For mission 17, I get to explore Shelob's lair with Sam. There are a bunch of individual Gondor soldiers and Gondor archers along the way, so I make sure to send Sam ahead and kill any spiders and cave trolls, while keeping my Gondor units clustered together where I know it's safe to make sure that they don't get preyed upon. And after searching through the tunnels for enemies, soldiers, because I have to rescue all of them, and any treasures that I finally run into Shelob herself. So I make sure to get all of the archers to back Sam up, and I send him in using the Phial of Galadriel to scare Shelob away while continuing to pelt her with arrows, and then using the heal. She still damages Sam a ton, but I am finally able to defeat her, and then in the final leg of the mission, I am given a base. I leave the base alone for a while after building some farms, just so I could have the resources to build up a bunch of battalions and fully upgrade them before I storm the moderately defended orc encampment that wins me the level. I let Sam die to Shelob a few times, but I was able to beat the mission in 4 attempts. For mission 18, we have the second major siege of the series where we defend Minas Tirith. But luckily for us, it's way easier this time around, and the reason is because we have wall trebuchets. So all we have to do is arm the walls with our best rangers, and the trebuchets can go to work. The enemies don't have bombs this time, and they also only charge for the gate, so I don't worry about any deaths until Grond shows up. Now there's no way to destroy Grond as far as I can tell before it destroys the gate, but that just means I have to send my melee heroes to the front to make sure that no one escapes to the back lines while my archers continue firing. Eventually, I get access to the Rohirrim yet again for their heroic charge, and I use that to retreat inside the walls, because there's absolutely no reason that I'd send my cavalry units to be trampled by the Mumakil when I can just shoot them from a distance with my rangers. Eventually, I was able to charge and destroy the 2 small enemy bases, but I had to wait for one more wave, but they stood no chance against Aragorn and the army of the dead who had just shown up, which made quick work of all of them, letting me win on my 4th attempt. For the penultimate mission, the armies of Gondor march into Dagorlad. Dagorlad is very simple but very difficult. It's just a simple open map with a bunch of command point spots, and the enemies will send infinite waves that I don't think are dependent on resources from what it seems like, based on what they build and what they've already captured. I tried to use Rohan at first, but with the amount of spear throwers that the enemy sends out that can take down the cavalry really easily, I didn't think it was a good idea. Plus, with the Gondor forces, I have Gandalf and Aragorn, who are both buffed by passive powers and are really strong, and I have my rangers with their tower guard accompaniment that can survive longer than the Rohirrim. I try to bolster up bases a little bit at first, but then I realized that the mission basically becomes impossible as soon as Mordor builds a siege works, because then they just send out a huge horde of catapults, and there aren't any heroes or units that can survive continuous catapult fire. I know that the starting enemy bases are in the far east, so on my 23rd attempt, I just blitz the far corner of the screen to take away their command posts as quickly as possible, and then as soon as I have a basic base set up, I start heading my troops down the map, which eventually led to me taking all of the enemy bases. And now the host of the Free Peoples approach the Black Gate to give Frodo enough time to stop Sauron once and for all. Aragorn gives a rousing speech, even though multiple battalions are in front of him for some reason, and I'm finally given control to destroy the Mordor hordes. So the stage resembles a siege, but not really. Like, it's not an in-depth besieging of a fortress, like the Dol Guldur or Rivendell missions in the second game. But I do build up multiple command points to collect my army and then send it out against the gate, so it's the same principle. In this campaign, neither Boromir nor Theoden in the Rohirrim died, so I do get another 15-minute timer to summon the Rohirrim to help out later on. I do use Faramir and Legolas to pick off the archers on the walls, and then sent my troops to the edge of the map behind the Black Gate, but most of the mission is a survival mission. So I used the tried and true method of running away to my corner of the map that I could most easily defend. I choose the base that's farthest away, that I name Mini Tirith, and mostly keep my armies inside of the walls, and just send out my heroes near the entrance where arrow towers are to face down the bulk of the enemies. This becomes much more difficult later on when there are stronger enemies like a ton of trolls and Mumakil sent after me, and I have to put my army out in front so I can have as much archer support as possible. The enemies mostly destroy my other two bases, but I'm able to keep my troops safe, and when the final countdown is going to 0, I have enough time to send out my army of the dead yet again to finish off the enemy troops and save the day. True to being the last mission, this one took the most attempts at 32, but I was finally able to defeat the Lord of the Rings with less deaths. Out of all the units that died and lost me my attempts, 4 of them stood 6 feet below the rest. In 4th place were the Lorien warriors, who mostly died at Helm's Deep 10 times. In 3rd place were the Rohirrim, who died 11 times charging into the enemy and dying. In 2nd place were the Athelian Rangers, who died 13 times, making up a bulk of the army and a bulk of the army's deaths. And at number 1, ironically, was Gandalf, who died 18 times, because he was the strongest single unit who could also be mounted and had the most health, which meant that I sent him out alone to die alone a lot. I hope you all liked this video, and I'll see you next time, viewers.